Street-level enforcers or notorious crime bosses, members of the American Mafia, believe they are untouchable, but sooner or later, the law catches up to them. So, from soldiers and henchmen carrying out hits to mob bosses who ordered them, here are 20 members of the Mafia reacting to life in prison. Matty Madonna. Matty Madonna served as the acting boss of the Lucchese crime family, one of the notorious 5 families of the New York Mafia. His criminal history spans several decades, but he first became well known for partnering up with Nicky Barnes in a massive trafficking ring. He was Nicky's major supplier of hard substances and was loyal to a fault. Even when state attorneys offered him complete immunity, even against self-incrimination, Matty refused to budge. In 1998, after serving over 20 years in prison, Matty was rewarded with entry into the Lucchese family immediately upon his release. He quickly rose through the ranks, and in the mid-2000s it was reported that Matty was serving as the acting boss of the family. While there had been several operations to bring him down, most notably Operation Heat, law enforcement officials could never trace anything back to the family itself. They believed that the Lucchese family was operating a gambling scheme worth over several $1 billion, but no one was willing to testify against them. Not only that, but law enforcement believed that Matty had also ordered several hits on people who had betrayed the family. The smoking gun came in 2017 when Michael Meldish, the leader of the Purple Gang and once an associate of the Lucchese family, was found unalived. It later emerged that Matty had ordered the hit on Michael after he had disrespected him. He was lured, shot, and left in the middle of the street to send a message. At the age of 84, investigators were finally able to arrest Matthew Madonna. The prosecution urged the judge to consider his criminal history, including the fact that there were many crimes that they did not know about committed by Matty. The judge agreed that he was a dangerous criminal and sentenced the boss of the Lucchese family to life in prison. He's currently 90 years old, serving time at the United States Penitentiary, McCreary, Kentucky. Stevie Crea. In the 1970s, Stephen Crea met and befriended Vincent DiNapoli, a well-known member of the Gevonese crime family. Together, they operated a construction company that secured millions of dollars in government grants, reportedly over $40 million in the 1980s and 90s. Stevie operated as a construction boss, demanding mob taxes from contractors, and decided whose crew would take over construction projects in the area. Stevie would also have legitimate contractors on his payroll who would report a taxable income to the Revenue Board, further evading suspicion. However, it is believed that Stevie's operation led to a 5% raise in spending in New York's construction budget, with not much to show for it. In any case, his criminal activities were impressive enough for the Lucchese family crime boss to welcome him. Soon, he rose through the ranks as captain, underboss, and eventually the acting boss. Ironically, Stevie was not wholly welcomed into the family. Some members, especially Brooklyn loyalists, believed that Stevie was not good for the family and planned on unaliving him. Stevie was arrested in 2000 for corruption charges related to his fraudulent construction business, but upon his release in 2006, he was promised seniority in the Lucchese family. When his parole was up in 2009, he was officially promoted to underboss status. But his reign ended in 2020 when Stevie, along with Matty Madonna, was indicted on the unaliving of Michael Meldish. He was sentenced to life in prison and ordered to pay over $400,000 in damages. As of 2024, it was reported that the 78-year-old Stevie Crea was suffering from stage 4 lung cancer while incarcerated at the United States Penitentiary, Canaan, in Pennsylvania. Vincent "Vinny" Gorgeous Basciano.
Were you investigated for this murder at all?
Actually, I was living in Jersey at the time, so I went back home. I made sure I had no easy pass to track me. I didn't have my phone with me that night. I know Vinny was a suspect at one point, but what got...
In the 90s, Vincent Basciano opened a salon named Hello Gorgeous. While owning and operating his salon, Vincent also doubled as a notorious mobster. Hence, he was known as Vinny Gorgeous. Vinny was a member of the Bonanno crime family and was believed to have taken part in racketeering, illegal gambling, and unaliving contracts throughout his time as a mobster. In 2004, state attorneys came very close to putting Vinny behind bars for the rest of his natural life, after he was convicted for unaliving a substance dealer, Frank Santoro. Alongside unaliving charges, prosecutors brought other charges on Vinny too, believing they had enough to convict him for life. However, after a hung jury, they had to retire those charges and start from scratch. Meanwhile, Vinny had been promoted as the boss of the Bonanno family after Joseph Massino's arrest. Then, to avoid charges against himself, Joseph agreed to become a state witness against Vinny and claimed that he had also ordered a hit on state prosecutor Greg Andres. Investigators began wiretapping Massino and tracked Vinny's conversations, ultimately collecting enough evidence that would suggest he had either ordered or carried out several unaliving hits. Because the case with Frank had been retired and prosecutors did not have enough evidence to convict him of ordering a hit on Andres, they needed Vinny to admit to ordering a hit on someone else. In 2011, during a wiretapped conversation, Vinny admitted to unaliving a former associate, Randolph "Randy" Pizzolo. By March 2011, Vinny was arrested, and that same year, a judge ordered he spend the rest of his life in prison. Raymond "Shrimp Boy" Chow.
Hong Kong. I born in Hong Kong.
Okay.
I come over when I was 16 and pretty much involved with the gang. Actually, I involved in the gang when I was a kid, back in Hong Kong.
Raymond Chow became a prominent figure in the San Francisco underworld as the leader of the Gi Kung Tong, a Chinese criminal organization with deep historical roots. Do not let the name fool you. Chow held major influence within the organized criminal landscape. His criminal history began in the 1970s when he moved to the United States from Hong Kong and quickly became involved with the Hop Sing Tong. Over the next few years, he was arrested on racketeering, substance trafficking, and robbery charges. In the early 2000s, Chow served a prison sentence but was released early after testifying against his former associates. Upon his release, he claimed to have turned his life around, presenting himself as a community leader and mentor to at-risk youth. However, federal investigators believed this was a front for continued criminal activity. In 2014, a massive undercover operation led to the arrest of Chow and several others, including California State Senator Leland Yee. The most serious charge against him involved the 2006 unaliving of his former boss, Alan Leong. Prosecutors alleged that Chow ordered the hit on Leong to take over the leadership of the Gi Kung Tong. In 2016, the jury found Chow guilty on all 162 counts. Throughout the trial, Chow kept smiling and laughing. He spoke out against the government, claiming the case was a political conspiracy. At his sentencing hearing, Chow spoke for over an hour, criticizing his lawyers and the judge. He maintained his innocence and insisted that he was a changed man who had been framed by corrupt officials. The judge was not moved and sentenced Chow to 2 life terms, plus an additional 2,906 years in prison. Joseph "Joey" Merlino.
Joey Merlino.
We're giving out turkeys.
Philadelphia police believe Skinny Joey is as heavy as a crime boss can be these days.
Joey Merlino was not a traditional crime boss. He did not hide from the media or lead a private life. Instead, Joey was always available for media appearances and was frequently seen hanging out in the local community. At the time, Joey had several charges stacked against him, with officers trying to build a strong enough case against him to put him away for life. But for the community, Joey was a hero. From the 90s through 2024, when he was finally arrested, Joey acted as the boss of the Philadelphia crime family. If the name Merlino rings a bell, it is probably because Joey is the son of the deceased mobster, Chucky Merlino. Everyone in his family was either a direct member of the mob or had links to the Philadelphia mob. All of them were revered as heroes. But there was obviously a dark side to Joey as well, of course. Joey was convicted on several counts of stabbing, assault, and while he was never convicted of unaliving, he was believed to have participated in the slayings of Felix Bocchino, Jimmy Diodorio, Michael Brennan, Michael Avicoli, and the attempted unalivings of Nicky Scarfo Jr., Joseph Chancaglini Jr., and John Stanfer. These were just some of his victims that law enforcement knew about. Joey is believed to have participated in several more. Joey was also known for inviting media teams to his annual Christmas parties, showcasing his lavish lifestyle. Many believed that he wanted to be the next John Gotti. In the 90s, Joey was also accused of starting a mob war with John Stanfer, a war that resulted in the unalivings of several people from both sides and ended with John Stanfer's life sentence for RICO charges. For a time, Joey really believed he was untouchable. That changed sometime in 2001 when Joey was arrested and sentenced on RICO charges, leading to an 11-year prison sentence. Upon his release, Joey claimed that he was reformed and alleged that law enforcement officials were constantly harassing him. Upon his release, Joey's career took a tangent, and he started a career in social media, frequently uploading videos and posts on popular social media sites. Because of his career shift from notorious crime boss to social media influencer, the Philadelphia crime family publicly excommunicated him. James "Jimmy the Man" Marcello.
Bourbon Lombard, where associates had fired up cigars on the deck and heralded his return to outfit glory. His freedom didn't last long, though, and little Jimmy was one of 5 top hoodlums convicted in the 2007 Family Secrets.
Known as Jimmy the Man, James Marcello was a major figure in the Chicago outfit, a criminal organization that has historically dominated organized crime in the Midwest. For decades, Jimmy operated in the shadows of the Chicago underworld, rising through the ranks to eventually become one of the top leaders of the organization. Jimmy maintained a low profile, which allowed him to evade law enforcement for a long time. However, his luck ran out in the early 2000s during one of the most significant mob trials in United States history. In 2005, Jimmy was indicted as a primary defendant in the Family Secrets trial. This landmark case was triggered by the cooperation of Nicholas Calabrese, a high-ranking hitman who decided to testify against his own brother and other outfit members. The trial shed light on decades of unsolved crimes, including 18 unalivings that had haunted the Chicago area for years. The most notable charge against Jimmy involved his participation in the 1986 unalivings of Tony "the Ant" Spilotro and his brother, Michael Spilotro. The brothers had been lured to a basement in a suburban home under the pretext of a promotion, only to be beaten and unalived by a group of outfit members. The prosecution presented evidence detailing how Jimmy had personally participated in the planning and execution of several hits. In 2007, a jury found Jimmy guilty on various counts of racketeering and unaliving. In February 2009, the judge sentenced the 66-year-old mobster to life in prison. Joseph Lombardo. Sometime in the 1950s, Joseph Lombardo joined the Chicago outfit, a highly sophisticated organized crime family that operated and practically owned most of the Midwest region. He was nicknamed the Clown, but was anything but to be taken as a joke. Joseph had started his criminal saga as a loan shark and an enforcer for other loan sharks. Throughout the 90s, law enforcement officials cracked down on Joseph's operations several times, 11 in total, but he was acquitted every time after witnesses either refused to testify against him or they could not positively identify him in lineups. This meant that he had enough time and confidence to rise through the ranks of the criminal underworld, eventually becoming a big name in the crime family. In 1992, following a 10-year prison sentence for bribing a state senator, Joseph took an unusual step when he took out an ad in the paper, openly denouncing the Mafia. In 2003, amid Operation Family Secrets, Joseph stood accused of the 1974 unaliving of Daniel Seifert. However, before the trial could officially begin, Joseph made a run for it. He would then communicate with the judge via letters he sent to his attorney, proclaiming his innocence. Joseph was eventually captured several months later, taking the stand in his own defense, and again, proclaiming that he was a reformed man and had never committed an unaliving in his life. However, an interesting and terrifying requirement of joining the Chicago outfit was that the member must have committed at least one unaliving. Joseph claimed that the rule only applied to people in high positions. In 2009, however, his luck ran out and he was sentenced to life in prison. While the presiding judge claimed that he believed Joseph was not the worst of the worst in the Mafia, he was still guilty of crimes that included, even if the unaliving charge was dropped, racketeering, loan sharking, and bribery. In 2019, at the age of 90, Joseph passed away while still being incarcerated. Frankie Locke Locasio.
He was never a betrayer of Castellano because he was closer to Castellano. I was closer to him too, then I'm a betrayer too. So anyway, but that's how the war broke down, and that's how it came down.
You have definitely heard of John Gotti, and probably have read about the 1992 conviction that put him behind bars for life. But did you know that Gotti was convicted alongside another high-ranking member of the Gambino crime family? That man was Gotti's right-hand associate, Frankie Lucasio. He joined the family as a made man sometime in the 1950s, quickly rising through the ranks alongside Gotti. He became a part of Gotti's inner circle, and when Paul Castellano was unalived in 1985, Gotti became the mob leader. Frankie became his consigliere. However, according to Salvatore "Sammy the Bull" Gravano, the two had grown to resent each other. Sammy eventually became a state witness in the aftermath of the Gambino family's crackdown and decided to testify against both Frankie and Gotti. He claimed that Frankie had told him on multiple occasions that he would unalive Gotti the first chance he got. Meanwhile, law enforcement officials believed that Gotti had hired hitmen from the Aryan Brotherhood, who were incarcerated alongside Frankie to unalive him. Both plans were foiled. Gotti passed away while incarcerated in 2000, and 1 year later, and Frankie passed away 20 years later, also from medical complications. Anthony Gaspipe Casso.
They don't know what to do for you, the people. I mean, don't get me wrong, they know you're a gangster, they know what you are. They go all out for you. Like go to restaurants, you don't wait online. They'll get you a table right away. You'll get the best of foods, the best of wines.
Anthony Casso, known as Gaspipe, was perhaps the most feared and psychopathic underboss in the history of the Lucchese crime family. His criminal journey began in the South Brooklyn docks, where he became a protege of Christopher "Christy Tick" Fornari. By the 1980s, Casso had established himself as a cold-blooded hitman who took part in dozens of unalivings. Together with his close associate, Vittorio "Vic" Amuso, Casso seized control of the Lucchese family in the late 80s. His paranoia was legendary. He famously believed that the family was infested with informants and ordered the unalivings of anyone he even slightly suspected of betraying the oath of silence. One of the most shocking aspects of Casso's career was his recruitment of two New York City police detectives, Stephen Caracappa and Louis Eppolito, whom he used as his own personal hit squad. Casso paid these corrupt officers to provide him with classified information and to carry out unalivings on his behalf. However, his reign ended in 1993, when he was finally apprehended by the FBI after spending years as a fugitive. Facing a massive indictment that included racketeering and over 30 counts of unaliving, Casso became a state informant. But while in federal custody, Casso continued to bribe guards and manipulate the legal system.
All right, I'm going into business. I'm going to open up Bradley Suits. I make men's clothing down there on 7th Avenue. But suppose I say, look, I've got these truckers over here who are going to move my suits. These are the people I want to use. I don't want to see your people. What happens?
First thing they're going to do is go.
His behavior was so erratic and his testimony so unreliable that the government eventually threw him out of the witness protection program. In 1994, a judge sentenced the 52-year-old Casso to 13 consecutive life sentences, plus an additional 455 years. He spent his final decades in solitary confinement, isolated from the very underworld he once dominated. He died in prison in 2020 due to health complications. Victor Amuso.
Vittorio "Vic" Amuso was convicted last June of committing 9 murders, plus charges of extortion, gambling, and labor corruption. U.S. Attorney Andrew Maloney said Amuso's conviction ranks with that of John Gotti in damaging organized crime. And like the Gotti case, key testimony against Amuso came from his trusted lieutenant.
Victor Amuso is currently the longest-serving crime boss of the famous 5 families, with an incarceration that goes back to 1987. He was a member of the Lucchese crime family, a dangerous underboss, and often referred to as the unaliving Don. His reign, from the 1970s through the 80s, is believed to have been the most lethal period in the American Mafia's history. According to law enforcement, Victor carried out his first few unalivings on the behest of Joseph "Crazy Joe" Gallo after he declared war against Giuseppe Joe Profazzi for skimming mob funds. This kick-started a mob war between the Gallo faction and the Profazzi faction, with multiple hits taken out on both sides. There was an active hit out on Victor and Gallo as well, but they were arrested in the 1960s on unrelated charges. When Gallo was shot and unalived in the 70s, Victor began working with Anthony Casso as a made man. Under the heavy influence of Casso, Victor issued a series of whack-on-sight orders, declaring that any member who did not follow his strict rules would be unalived. In 1990, When federal investigators were closing in on a massive racketeering case involving the windows scam, a scheme where the mob controlled the replacement of windows in New York City public housing, Victor and Casso decided to go on the run. For several months, Victor managed to lead the Lucchese family while hiding in various safe houses across the country. Even while a fugitive, he continued to order hits. His run finally ended in 1991 when the Federal Bureau of Investigation tracked him down to a shopping center in Scranton, Pennsylvania. In 1992, Victor was convicted on all counts, including racketeering and the unaliving of various associates. The judge sentenced him to life in prison without the possibility of parole. Joseph Massino.
Joey Messina, boss of the Bananos. I knew him very well. Became an informant while he was in prison with a huge sentence. So, I mean, who do you trust anymore?
Joseph Massino holds a highly unusual place in the world of organized crime. Unlike his peers, who adhered strictly to the code of silence, Massino became the very first sitting boss of a New York crime family to become a state witness. Before he decided to cooperate with the government, he was known for successfully rebuilding the Bonanno crime family during the 1980s and 90s. The organization had been weakened after it was revealed that an undercover agent for the Federal Bureau of Investigation had infiltrated their ranks. Massino closed down social clubs and demanded absolute secrecy, restricting how members communicated and operated. Despite his cautious approach, law enforcement eventually caught up with his operations. In 2004, Massino faced a massive racketeering trial. The prosecution presented evidence connecting him to the unaliving of 7 individuals over the course of his career. One of the most notable charges was his involvement in the 1981 unaliving of Dominic Napolitano, a mobster who was held responsible by the family for allowing the undercover agent into their inner circle. The jury ultimately found Massino guilty on all of the charges. Following his conviction, state attorneys sought capital punishment against Massino for the 1999 unaliving of Galando Siasha. Massino approached federal prosecutors and offered to provide information on the inner workings of the Bonanno family. As part of his cooperation, Massino secretly recorded conversations with his acting boss, Vincent Basciano, while they were both held in federal custody. In 2005, Massino was formally sentenced to life in prison for his initial convictions. However, his reaction to this life sentence was entirely focused on reducing it through continuous cooperation with the authorities. He testified extensively in court, providing evidence that led to the convictions of several high-ranking members of his own organization. Because of his substantial assistance to the government, a federal judge agreed to formally reduce his life sentence in 2013. Massino was released from federal prison and entered a supervised release program. He lived the remainder of his life outside of prison walls under medical care, entirely removed from the underworld, until his passing in 2023 at the age of 80. Tommy Shots, G.O.L.E.
And now to a big Mafia takedown today. The FBI, NYPD, and other agencies zeroed in on reputed members and associates of the Colombo crime family. More than a dozen arrests made here, including the man prosecutors say is the Colombo crime boss.
Tommy Shots joined the Colombo crime family sometime in the 1980s under Capo Vittorio Vic Orena. By 1982, he was charged with his first confirmed unaliving, the unaccidental slaying of Veronica Zurao, a former nun. Tommy testified in court that he was innocent, and even if the bullet had unalived Veronica, she was not the intended target. The bullet was actually meant for Joseph Perino, a former member of the Colombo family who was believed to have turned state witness. He was never charged with Veronica's unaliving, but caught law enforcement's attention once again in 1997 for the unaliving of an NYPD detective, Ralph Doles. Joel Cacace had allegedly ordered the hit on Ralph after he married his ex-wife. Again, he was never tried or convicted for the unaliving. In the 1990s, during the breakdown and internal conflicts between the Colombo family, when different factions arose, Tommy changed sides twice. He went from being a member of Oreno's side to Persico's side when he realized Persico was gaining the upper hand. In the 1990s, Tommy unalived at least 5 mobsters, including 2 new underbosses of the Colombo family. Alphonse, Little Alley Boy, Persico.
This is why you need to know about Alley Boy Persico. The son of a mob legend, his life was anything but ordinary. Born into the infamous Colombo crime family, Alley Boy Persico was destined for a life of crime.
The Colombo crime family was united under Carmine Persico, but trouble soon began when he was sentenced to life in prison and his son, Ali Persico, became the family's new head in 1996. Prosecutors allege that Ali did not intend to join the family business until after his sophomore year at college, ironically, studying law. But by his 20s, he had grown used to the power and money that came with being a part of the Mafia and was not about to give it up. When Carmine was sentenced to 139 years in prison in 1987, he named his brother and son as his successors. However, with both of them facing prison sentences of their own, Carmine declared Victor Orena would be the acting boss of the family until Ali was released. He made it clear to the Colombo family that Orena was only the temporary boss. Ali was his actual successor. While Orena agreed, at least at the time, he soon shifted his focus to taking complete control of the crime family. This meant eliminating Ali and all of his loyalists, one by one. The tensions created in the family did not go away even after Orena was sentenced to life in prison, and Ali became the underboss of the family. While serving time for another RICO charge, Ali ordered a hit on the next acting boss of the Colombo family, William Cutolo. Ali was paranoid that William would try to take over the reins, just like Orena did. In 1999, William's wife reported him missing, and an investigation was launched. It was not until 2008 that William's body was recovered, and it soon became apparent that Tommy Gioeli had unalived him on Ali's orders. From 2001 onward, Ali was indicted on one charge after another. When he managed to complete his sentence for carrying weapons as a registered felon, he was immediately sentenced on loan sharking charges. While that case was still pending, investigators managed to build a case against Ali for the unaliving of William Cutolo. Interestingly, when Ali was arrested for the first time in the 1980s, the presiding judge gave him a lenient sentence, hoping he would be able to turn his life around. This time, having understood that Ali was beyond repair, he was sentenced to life in prison. James Whitey Bulger.
So I used to live in South Boston, and back in the late 80s, early 90s, and it was run by Whitey Bulger. Yeah. The town was literally run for 50, 60 years by organized crime. And I had a boxing program there, and one day I was teaching, and two guys showed up and said I owed them $2,500.
James Bulger, famously known as Whitey due to his light blonde hair, was the leader of the Winter Hill Gang in Boston, Massachusetts. Bulger's criminal power was tied to a corrupt relationship with the FBI. For several decades, Bulger acted as a confidential informant while simultaneously operating a violent criminal enterprise involved in extortion, substance trafficking, and unaliving. His primary contact, Special Agent John Connolly, protected Bulger from local law enforcement by providing him with information about rival gangs and pending investigations. In 1994, as federal prosecutors prepared to indict him, Bulger was tipped off by Connolly and fled Boston. He remained a fugitive on the most wanted list for 16 years, successfully evading capture by living under various aliases across the country. It was not until 2011 that investigators located the 81-year-old Bulger living in an apartment in Santa Monica, California, where they discovered over $800,000 in cash hidden inside the walls. Bulger was returned to Boston to face trial for a racketeering indictment that included 19 counts of unaliving. During the 19-week trial in 2013, the prosecution presented testimony from former associates who described how Bulger personally participated in the strangulation and shooting of informants and rivals. One notable victim was Deborah Davis, whom Bulger was accused of unaliving to prevent her from revealing his criminal activities. In November 2013, the judge sentenced Bulger to 2 consecutive life terms plus 5 years. Bulger was eventually transferred to several high-security facilities.
Freddie Gias has been named as one of 4 inmates who beat Bulger to death in his prison cell with a padlock inside a sock, according to a published report. The beating was so savage, 89-year-old Bulger was unrecognizable when his body was found. It's believed he had a target on his back because he'd been exposed as an FBI informer. Freddie hated.
In 2018, within hours of being moved to a federal prison in West Virginia, the 89-year-old was attacked and unalived by other inmates. Peter Gotti,
New tonight, mob boss Peter Gotti has died in prison. The 81-year-old was once the head of the Gambino crime family. Prosecutors said he was a successor to his younger brother, John. Peter Gotti was convicted on racketeering and other charges in 2003 and had been serving a 25-year sentence in North Carolina. Gotti died of natural.
While law enforcement officials marked him as a wanted criminal and a dangerous man, the Gambino family held little to no regard for Peter Gotti. He was one of John Gotti Sr.'s 13 children, and was nicknamed One-Eye Gotti for developing glaucoma in one of his eyes. While he also joined the Gambino family like his siblings, he was not promoted to high ranks until much, much later. In contrast, his younger brother, John Gotti, was one of the most prolific criminal underbosses in history. John Gotti Sr. believed that Peter was not fit to run the family. As such, his nickname was the Dumbest Don. So, how did he eventually rise through the ranks? When John Gotti was sent to prison for RICO charges and sentenced to life in prison, with no chance of parole, he appointed his son and brother as de facto capos. Basically, their role was to relay his orders from inside prison. According to some associates, Peter was officially sworn in as the Gambino family's underboss in 1999. Then, in 2002, just a few days before John Gotti's passing, Peter was arrested on racketeering charges and faced a possibility of life in prison. While still facing racketeering charges, state prosecutors layered on more and more convictions: loan sharking, bribery, extortion, and so on. While Peter's lawyers tried to get him a lighter sentence on compassionate grounds, he suffered from a myriad of diseases and health concerns. He was sentenced to over 3 decades in prison. In 2021, with almost a decade still left in his prison term before he would have been eligible for parole, Peter Gotti passed away from natural causes at the age of 81. Carmine, the Snake Persico.
One faction, loyal to Carmine Persico, the old boss, now serving 100 years in prison. The other faction, loyal to Vic Arena, the new boss, who was gone in.
Carmine was a long-standing boss of the Colombo crime family and one of the most notable faces in the history of the Italian-American Mafia. His criminal career began in the 1950s as a member of the Garfield Boys in Brooklyn, where he was first arrested for an unaliving at the age of 17. Persico was known as the Snake because he would often flip sides during mob wars and was even accused of attempting to unalive his friends to gain power. By the 1970s, despite spending a significant portion of his life behind bars, Carmine had established himself as the undisputed leader of the Colombo family. In 1985, along with the heads of the other 5 families, Carmine was indicted on massive racketeering charges. He chose to represent himself during the trial. While he was praised by the judge for his intelligence and legal skills, Carmine was ultimately unsuccessful in convincing anyone of his innocence. In 1987, the judge sentenced Persico to a total of 139 years in prison. He told reporters that he would be home in time for dinner, refusing to acknowledge the court's decision. He remained the official boss of the family for over 30 years from behind bars until he passed away in 2019 at the age of 85. Salvatore "Sammy the Bull" Gravano. Salvatore Gravano, the former underboss of the Gambino crime family, is widely known for 19 admitted unalivings and his role as a government witness. Gravano was a key figure in the 1985 unaliving of Paul Castellano, an act that allowed John Gotti to become the family boss. As Gotti's second-in-command, Gravano managed the family's construction and labor racketeering interests. However, in 1991, Gravano was arrested alongside Gotti on federal racketeering charges. After listening to FBI surveillance tapes in which Gotti criticized him and discussed making him a scapegoat for the family's crimes, Gravano decided to cooperate with federal prosecutors. In 1992, Gravano's testimony was the primary evidence used to convict John Gotti, resulting in a life sentence for the boss. In exchange for his cooperation, Gravano was sentenced to only 5 years in prison, despite his involvement in nearly 20 unalivings. After his release in 1995, he briefly entered the Witness Protection Program, but left it to live under his own name in Arizona. In 2000, Gravano was arrested again for organizing a massive ecstasy trafficking ring that involved several members of his family. For this narcotics conviction, a judge sentenced him to 20 years in federal prison, which he served until his release in 2017. Thomas "Tommy" Karate Pitera.
He's an alleged mob hitman who's headed a gang of hired murderers and drug dealers, and tonight he's behind bars. The feds say Tommy Karate Patera lived by the book, a book of murder and torture and no remorse. Robert Gilmartin has the story.
Thomas Patera was known as Tommy Karate because, besides being a mobster, he also held a black belt in martial arts. He fared well in his career as a soldier for the Bonanno crime family during the 1980s. Tommy was known for being very hands-on and technical, but unfortunately, he used that skill to commit the perfect, untraceable unalivings he could. He would reportedly spend several hours a day studying forensic books to learn how to properly dispose a body. While law enforcement officials do not have a particular number, it is believed that Tommy has unalived in the double digits.
How to Kill Volume 5. Got other volumes here.
Federal agents say an alleged soldier in the Bonanno crime family, Tommy Patera, who goes by the name of Tommy Karate, was an avid reader of books like How to Kill, Volumes 1 through 5.
He would dismember his victims and then bury them in Staten Island's Birdland Meadow, which is where investigators found tons of skeletal remains of his victims. Tommy was untouchable for a long time because of his expertise, but it came crashing down in 1990 when he was arrested for federal racketeering and unaliving charges. Prosecutors claimed he was a violent criminal with no chance of rehabilitation, pointing out that he had unalived at least 6 people that they could possibly identify. Many more could not be identified because of how thorough Tommy was in his craft. He was sentenced to 7 life sentences plus an additional 20 years. John Gotti. John Gotti was the boss of the Gambino crime family and remains one of the most well-known figures in the history of organized crime. He rose to power in December 1985 after orchestrating the unaliving of the standing boss, Paul Castellano, outside a steakhouse in Manhattan. Following this, Gotti assumed control of the largest and most powerful criminal organization in the United States at the time. Gotti became a media fixture, earning the nicknames the Dapper Don for his expensive suits and the Teflon Don after he was acquitted in 3 high-profile criminal trials during the late 1980s. However, the FBI had successfully placed electronic bugs that captured Gotti discussing various illegal operations and multiple unalivings, including those of his own associates. The tapes also contained Gotti's disparaging remarks about his underboss, Salvatore Gravano. Gravano decided to turn state witness and testified against Gotti. In 1992, Gotti was convicted on 13 counts, including racketeering, 5 unalivings, conspiracy to commit unaliving, bribery, and illegal gambling. The judge sentenced Gotti to life in prison without the possibility of parole. Outside the courthouse, hundreds of his supporters gathered to protest the verdict, which resulted in a riot. While incarcerated, in 1998, he was diagnosed with throat cancer and underwent several surgeries. Despite his condition, Gotti remained in federal custody until his passing in June 2002 at the age of 61. Anthony "Tony Ducks" Corallo.
Andy Russo just made his other son, the youngest one. Boy. I guess on the last, recently, I don't know when, I mean, you know, in the last year, yeah, he made his 2 sons. So they'll make him good? No, not now. I mean, not my thinking right now is no. Might change 5 years from now, 10 years from now, but right now my thinking is no.
Anthony Corallo was the official boss of the Lucchese crime family and a central figure in the historic commission trial of the 1980s. He earned the nickname Tony Ducks due to his ability to duck subpoenas and avoid legal trouble for much of his criminal career. Corallo was known for labor racketeering and construction schemes. His downfall began when investigators planted a listening device in his Jaguar. The bug captured Corallo discussing the inner workings of the Mafia Commission, which gave the government the evidence needed to prosecute the entire leadership of the New York mob at once.
In December 1985, an opportunity presents itself.
In 1985, Corallo was one of the primary defendants in the commission trial. The prosecution proved that he was involved in a massive conspiracy to control labor unions and extortion rackets across New York City. In 1986, at the age of 73, Corallo was found guilty on all counts of racketeering. In January 1987, the judge sentenced him to 100 years in prison with no possibility of parole. He remained in federal custody until he passed away from natural causes in August